Guys, we're gonna talk about something phenomenal today. We are going to talk about X Men numbers 1 to 4. Right, so the X Men started out in the 70s, the 60s, with Stan Lee, of course, and Stan Lee was making several publications going out at the same time, so he didn't really have a lot of time to work on one thing per se. But Chris Claremont is the guy who really made X-Men, like, he's what made it cool, in my point of view at least. And I haven't read every X-Men book that is out there. So there were some X-Men books between Stan Lee and Chris Claremont, but I'm just going to tell you that, right, so we started out with Uncanny X Men. Back then it was Uncanny X Men, and then they stopped. They were reprinting some of the old stuff. Then they came out with something called X Men in the 90s to follow with the cartoon. Like right after the cartoon, the animated series TAS, there was a peak in the popularity of the X-Men, and they reinvented Magneto as not just a complete villain, but as someone who, I'm sure you'd remember stuff from the cartoon. He was not completely bad. He would join with the good guys from time to time. So that's what we're talking about. So we have Chris Claremont on, like he was the writer of these books. And then back in the day, Chris Claremont was paired up with John Byrne, who was awesome. And here are some of John Byrne's works. I would say that John Byrne's man, or the male characters that John Byrne drew, were more square-jawed and full-faced, I guess. Right, and this is one of the defining origin stories of Superman, the one that was in continuity during the 90s, I guess. And I'll show you a picture of that. Right, and every time John Byrne writes, John Byrne does the story and the pencils. As far as I know, that's how it goes. So, a lot of people have drawn Superman. I think Dan Jurgens was pretty cool, but this is also cool. This is John Byrne. And, right, so, Chris Claremont used to work with John Byrne when he did old X-Men stuff. But in this particular book, we are going to see him with Jim Lee. And who is Jim Lee? Jim Lee was the artist who was responsible for everything in the cartoon. He actually created Gambit. So I would say that compared to John Byrne's art, Jim Lee's art was more, you got slimmer, taller people, and the guys were more defined. He also drew really good women, of course. But like I really like the way he draws the male characters, and well, here's all of the X-Men here with the smoking going on, and so I would say when you think of John Byrne, think Wolverine with the mutton chops and all the facial hair and the Beast. But when you think Jim Lee, well, I mean, these are the faces that Jim Lee draws, and they are awesome. As far as artists go, I think Jim Lee is the best. That, personally, to me, Jim Lee's art is the most attractive. Because I grew up with the X-Men cartoon. But different people may disagree and have their own favorites. Like, look at those ninja fights. They're awesome. But this is not exactly the book that we're going to talk about. Right, so, what was I talking about? Right, so, we had Uncanny X Men, and it got to X Men. And what was the So what made Uncanny X Men so special? What made Chris Claremont's run really special? He took Genosha and he made a slave theory out of that. And as you might have heard, the X-Men are supposed to be something that is relatable to young people of minorities and also to homosexuals. And you can see how this goes, because remember in the second movie, in X-Men the last, X2 United something, the one where Bobby Drake goes to his house and is sort of not accepted by his parents. This kind of shows how American parents, most parents, react to their child's homosexuality. That was the idea of that movie. Ian McKellen and the people who did the movie were all pro LGBT. So yeah, and I think when we talk about X-Men, Mutant Massacre or the Morlock Massacre really showed how outcasts lived in society. Like, there were these people who did not look like people and were rejected from society, like Leech and this lady who was kind of 2D and had rainbow hair. Actually, that was right. So these people had to go live in the sewers away from people, and that's the kind of thing that Chris Claremont used to do. And I think his stories were great then and now. Like, if I can, we're gonna get into some Genosha stuff. So we had aliens. We had excuse me. We had aliens come in. We had the Swarm attacking. That's an alien from the Swarm right there. Then we had Genosha. Oh, hey. Let me show you one really awesome dude here. Okay, I lost him. Never mind then. I'll show that to you on a different day. Oh, there he is. Mr. Sinister. Yeah. So Mr. Sinister was probably introduced by Chris Claremont, but don't hold me to that. So we're gonna see stuff about... Yeah, this is Genosha. And this is a really cool comic where Carol Danvers' or Miss Marvel's personality takes control of Rogue's body after she has had kind of a traumatic experience. So here we see Wolverine teaming up with his old CIA mate, Carol Danvers. And we have some really cool scenes that take place with here's Dazzler. That was pretty good too. Oh yeah, and sorry I'm taking too long. Oh, by the way, that's Carol Danvers, Miss Marvel right there. But this is not the book that we're actually gonna talk about today. So there's a lot more in this video, I guess. And right, so we're gonna skip Genosha for now. We're gonna do a separate thing with Genosha. But I really like how they would picture mutants as something that's not as human, dehumanized. Alright, so a little bit more about Chris Claremont. Chris Claremont brought the X-Men from here to here by doing those things that we just talked about. He brought depth to the concept of mutants. Is what I've heard. Alright, don't hold me to it. And I would say he was kind of the big deal during the 70s or the 80s. There was a lot of free love in his themes as well, I think, because we just talked about Dazzler. And Dazzler and Longshot had a cool thing going on. They were kind of like Gambit and Rogue in their series. And then Gambit comes along, thanks to Jim Lee. We're going to talk about that. Chris Claremont also did Iron Fist, and he was responsible for... so he kind of had to choose between the mutants and Iron Fist, and he didn't want to give it away, I guess, because he worked on both titles at the same time. But he had to choose one. And he made Misty Stone, who was Iron Fist's girlfriend, the roommate of Jean Grey's. So he kind of connected Iron Fist stories with X-Men stories, and you're gonna see people, on phone calls at least, when the X-Men were in Japan, looking for Sunfire, you see a few panels where Misty and Jean were in the same apartment, or they were talking over a phone call or something like that. That's pretty cool. Jim Lee was kind of in the new wave, sort of, with you've all heard of Rob Liefeld, right? So Rob Liefeld also had the muscular men thing going on. He did X-Force and all those things. Cable was his, but Cable's also in the... Yeah, that's what I was gonna try to show you in the other thing, because we have Genosha and Madeline Pryor and her little baby, who would one day grow up to be Apocalypse's menace. Cable, Nathaniel Summers. Yeah, Nathaniel Summers was in that book. That's what I wanted to show you. Anyway, we're gonna take a long few moments just appreciating all of the art that's in this book. I just love Jim Lee. I just really, really love Jim Lee. And one year when, like, at the dorms, my RA used the faces of athletes on our doors to kind of make us feel cool, but there was no athlete that I could really kind of, like, I had no favorite athletes, so I put Jim Lee's face on my door because he was the coolest person I knew. Speaking of the coolest people I know, we're going to take a look at all of the people who were kind of involved in this book. And you might have heard me say this before, and you're going to hear me say it a lot. But Joe Rubinstein and Bob Harris was part of this book. And yeah, I've met Joe Rubinstein and Bob. Those are the only famous people that I know, so it's kind of cool that I've met them. Well, it's kind of cool to me. So what happens here? Right, let's get into the story and the art and all that. There's a band of mutants escaping Earth on a plane/spaceship flying over to something called Asteroid M. Now, what is Asteroid M? You might remember Bishop having this scar on his eye, a scar, an M, depicting him as a mutant and also an outlaw that used to work for Magneto. So Magneto is kind of like a really strong political figure in the mutant mythos. And here he is, minding his own business on his own planet. He had left Earth because he hated Earth so much that he couldn't fix things on Earth, and his friends wouldn't let him. So after some time, he just thought he was just gonna take himself out of the situation and let people do their thing. And he explains it here. I'm Magneto, this is my home. I am rapidly losing interest in whatever you choose to do on the Earth's surface. Despoil the environment, slaughter yourselves to the last child, I no longer care. But I refuse to allow you to extort your penchant for violence at my very doorstep. So here we have humans chasing after a group of mutants who call themselves the Acolytes. So, yeah. Magneto leaves Earth, and he's living on his own. Okay, you know how hermits or sages move away and live in a cave? Magneto is so fucking awesome that he has his own asteroid. He lives on his own asteroid, which he probably created from all the metal that was around. So it's not completely, it's artificial, it's his. He built it and he lives there. What does he eat? Now that is something that maybe he sustains himself through, oh, there's Nick Fury. We're going to see another picture of Nick Fury that's really cool. He's not going to be in a suit. He's going to be holding a gun. That's awesome. That's really cool. So yeah, we have, we're going to see some really cool pictures where, alright, so there's a story, legend has it that, okay, so when Wolverine's gone through so many costumes, and you probably know all of these things, he had whiskers on his mask at one point, and he also went by this Fang identity or feral identity, where he was sort of bare-chested, I think, and wore a necklace, and that was his costume there. But usually when you think of Wolverine, you're gonna picture him in two costumes. The yellow and blue costume, which I'll see if I can find it over here. Right, so you're gonna find it in shreds over here. We won't have time to talk about this comic. I think I'll try to do it again, but I just wanted to show you the yellow and blue costume first. It's in shreds right here, but let's see if we can... Well, you see a lot of it over here, and you get the picture. You know what I'm talking about, because Wolverine is one of the most... he's a character that's always out there, and like you cannot possibly miss Wolverine, right? Alright, so now we're gonna talk about what I was originally talking about, obviously. Oh, there it is. So this is the blue and yellow costume that he used to have. John Byrne comes in and puts him in a tan and yellow costume, which personally was not my favorite for a long time. I prefer the yellow and blue costume, or I used to think. But here you have Wolverine in the brown and tan costume, drawn by Jim Lee. Now there's a story that when Jim Lee took over from John Byrne, and they were all in the same room, Jim Lee announced that he would like to put Wolverine back in the yellow and blue costume, and kind of mocked the tan and yellow costume, which was apparently either John Byrne's or Clairemont's or both of their ideas. And they say that was an embarrassing moment. But look at how complementary the yellow is to the tan, to the fire that's around them, or the robot. Like, all these colors go really well together. And there's Psylocke, who is like amazingly hot. If you read Mutant Massacre, yeah, Massacre is when Psylocke joins the team. But there were two Psylocks. There was a Japanese Psylocke and there was an English Psylocke. So, Captain Britain's sister, Betsy Braddock, was a really soft girl, but when she joined the X-Men, she fought Sabretooth by herself and won. Well, Storm had to kind of help her, and Wolverine was there too, but she earned Wolverine's respect there, because Wolverine used to mock her. But now she's something totally different. She's this ninja girl who is something between a girl called Revenant and Psylocke. So, yeah, you're gonna see awesome pictures of Wolverine just crashing through this wall, and then challenging Chuck, as he calls him, and almost kills him. Like, I really like how this picture comes out of the screen, like the amount of depth that's in this picture. And then we have Wolverine and Cyclops duking it out, the teacher's pet and the Radical. So anyway, here's the story. Magneto is minding his own business up in Asteroid M. These acolytes flee the Earth and come asking for his help. One of them dies, which really pisses Magneto off. And like I said, like, I really believe in Magneto. Magneto is one of my heroes. I like Magneto more than the X-Men collectively, but I wouldn't say he's my single favorite character, because I do like Gambit and Cyclops better than Magneto and Storm. I used to not like Wolverine, but now I'm getting into him because, when I was a kid, I didn't like Wolverine as much. He was always making trouble. He was the Raphael of the group. In fact, Raphael was kind of based on Wolverine, of the Ninja Turtles, I should specify. Yeah, so Magneto is forced back into the fray. And I should mention that the Acolytes were a group of like bad people that tricked Magneto into getting back and kind of got him in a bad position, and then turned out to be... So the head of the Acolytes, whose name was Fabian, was actually leeching life out of Magneto and keeping him weak, and kind of putting things into his head. So here we have Magneto being a villain, but not by his own choice, out of compassion, and also because these other people that were seeking his help were tricking him. So something cool that Magneto does is he raises a set of nuclear missiles from the ocean, and this is something that's kind of common. So we go into World War II era is not my favorite era of history. In fact, I know very little about history, global history, and but I do know that World War II happened, and a lot of people say that it's one of the worst things. For me personally, the Age of Exploration was something much worse than World War II. If you think about it, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, these people with horses and limited tech did much more than the Germans did with tanks, is how I see it. But we touch on Magneto's past, Magneto's childhood as a Jewish boy in Germany who lived through the Auschwitz prisons, which was something introduced by Chris Claremont. Now you see, that's why I said Claremont made X Men great. in many ways, not just one. There was a lot of fights with aliens back in the day, so I guess he did touch on the Age of Exploration thing. He was a genius. He was talking religion and history and politics all in comics, and I think he highlighted the importance of a comic book. It's not just entertainment, it could be something bigger. And here we find out that Rogue and Magneto kind of used to have an affair in the past. Still not clear on that. And we have some amazing shots. Each shot in this book is just perfect. You see cards flying out, you see Gambit and Beast just, jumping out of the... a lot of action, a lot of masculinity, a lot of muscle. Also, I'm not just saying just masculinity, there's a lot of energy. We have a lot of ladies as well. But even the ladies are really aggressive and really muscular and really toned. So I would say that the way... oh yeah, here's Fabian. And look at the lines on his face. Those are really cool. The inks are actually what makes the shadows and the glossiness come out. And we have one picture here. We have several pictures that look like this. So we have half of Wolverine's face and half of Magneto's. So a lot of these are just fights, and we have some brilliant quotes here. These are some really nice quotes by Magneto, where he talks about how he thinks that mutant kind is going to take over, and how humanity is sort of an outdated species. So there's biology, there's history, there's philosophy, sometimes not complete stuff of any subject. Anyway, after all of this happens, so let me just read some of the cool things that happens. Stop. This is Magneto speaking. Stop. With the whole world screaming for mutant blood, we cannot afford to waste our energies fighting amongst ourselves. Strange, we always figured we were standing against injustice. That's what Beast says. Then, Beast, your place should be by my side. For what greater injustice can there be than a people who would hate and even destroy their children, simply because they exist? And you're indifferent? Your leaders are beaten, your cause lost. I call on you to... well, he's holding Cyclops when he says that. I'm going to go to the other page where he says stuff about humanity. Cyclops. Magneto. Sorry about that. Yep. Cyclops. Magneto. Although this incident... that's Magneto again. Although this incident occurred without my knowledge or permission, these acolytes have pledged themselves to me... yeah. Only magistrates were slain or injured. I could say that is mere... Okay, so who are the magistrates of Genosha? Those are the humans in charge of supervise. So they are like the human supervisors, trying to keep the order of Genosha. They're like the cops. They're like the authority of Genosha, who control and keep the slaves, the mutant slaves, in their place. So it's really oppressive, and they're not doing something that's really nice. But they are Genosha's top people. They're an authority. They're something that's recognized by law. Only magistrates were slain. They acted in an excess of zeal, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so Wolverine claims Magneto for breaking rules, and this is why Magneto is so cool. What we got here, bub? A new twist on the divine right of kings. You figure since you live above the world, that puts you above its law as well. Laws written by humans, for humans, Wolverine, as out of date as the race that created them. A new generation is being born, and with it must come a new world order. All my life, I have seen people slaughtered wholesale for no more reason than the deity they worship, or the color of their skin, or the presence in their DNA of an extra special gene. So here we see, without any obscuration, without any doubt, without any subtleties, we're seeing very clearly how Clairemont compares mutants to people of color and people of different religions and ethnicities. So what we're shown here is a split, a schism inside humanity because of the powers that the mutants have. That's all cool. And then we're gonna talk about one more thing before I end this video. No, first of all, we're gonna talk about how cool Professor X and Forge and Banshee and even these guys over here, Psylocke, and like, we're gonna talk about these shots. We're gonna talk about these panels and just say how awesome they are. Right. And then Magneto confronts Moira MacTaggert in her lab and brings him to... Okay, so that's another really cool shot because we have two ex-best friends and two I wouldn't call them arch enemies because they are enemies. They do stuff that they can't agree with. Like, they'll never agree, but they were friends at some point. And he confronts Moira MacTaggert, and this is something really cool about Magneto's origins. They retconned it. First of all, there was a younger Magneto with silver hair called Joseph, who turned out to be, am I spoiling this for you? A clone of the original Magnetos. And it just so turns out that Moira MacTaggert and Professor X together turned Magneto back into a baby and tried to redesign his genetic code so that he would be a little better. So they essentially tried to brainwash Magneto in a similar move that Zatanna and the Justice League did to Dr. Light in Identity Crisis. Depending on which came first, I would call one a copy of the other. But that's hard to say. Anyway, thank you for listening to this video. That's what I wanted to show you. I ran out of time. I didn't plan this through. I took way more time than I needed to. But it's, you know, I'm not going to give you everything that's in the comic. You got to read it for yourself, right? There's a lot of emotional stuff going on, and there's this talk about choices that people need to make, and, you know, firm stands on either side and fighting to protect people. The X-Men is really cool, and I just want you to know that there is stuff like this in comics, and that Chris Claremont was the person who was responsible for this stuff. And Jim Lee had his own line of stories called Wildcats and stuff like that, which he did with, was it Vertigo, Tangent? Well, he broke off into a subsect of DC and did his own thing with 5 other people, including Rob Liefeld and people like that. That's when Cyberforce and things came in. And Jim Lee had another character who was very close to Gambit. Like, they didn't know each other. They were in different universes, but he's kind of like the Gambit of DC Universe. His name was Grifter. He wore a mask, which was red with only eye slits. Kind of looked like Spawn in a way, just a mask. Yeah, Grifter and Gambit were both thieves with a kind of a criminal past working for the good guys now. They both had brothers that got them in trouble, and yeah, you should look into that.